It is my pleasure to return to Boston Lyric Opera to talk about Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde, Songs of the Earth, and Boston Lyric Opera's innovative and daring dramatic full staging of Mahler's work, something that is rarely done. Although we now consider Mahler to be one of the 20th century's greatest German composers, during his lifetime, audiences were decidedly divided about his compositions. His music bridged the gap between the old and new European styles. He took chromaticism to its extreme and broke countless rules regarding form and standard compositional practices of the time. Through his post as head artistic director at the Vienna State Opera, he also became known for his innovations in programming, production values, and training artists. He personally handpicked and trained singers to greater levels of technical and expressive communication. He developed their actual acting skills and supported innovative and cutting-edge scenic and production design. His in-house opera productions that he collaborated on with Alfred Rolle were unsurpassed by none and widely attended. Even the anti-Mahler factions had to admit his productions were impeccable and brilliant on every level. He was constantly introducing singers and audiences to new and old works, and some of his productions became famous, such as Fidelio, Iphigenie en Auride, and Tristan und Isolde. The Vienna State Opera became one of the most respected opera houses in Europe, with Mahler as artistic head. It was a dream post for 10 years in Mahler's life, where he conducted during the winter months and composed in the countryside in the summer. It was a perfect existence for him. Despite his brilliance, by 1907, the anti-Mahler faction started gaining traction and his life began to unravel as he knew it. His final year at the court opera was fraught with critic and audience dissatisfaction with repertoire, production and cast choices, scandals with singer contracts, lack of support of his superior, the high court official Alfred Montenuevo, Mahler's frequent absences, and a general bad morale within the company. He wrote to a longtime friend who asked if the rumors were true about him resigning. Mahler responded, "It is all quite true. I am going because I can no longer endure the rabble." News of his resignation inspired his admirers to draft a letter of support and a plea for him to remain. It was signed by an extraordinary cross-section of the Viennese intelligentsia and is worth quoting, for it reflects the enormous impact Mahler had on the artistic growth and artistic integrity of Vienna during his time at the court opera. Quote, "By your ability to create favorite works in an entirely novel and impressive way and lay bare their essence and lend them musical expression, and by a magnificent series of artistic feats whose achieved aim was the implementation of a new style of performance, but above all, and perhaps even more than through any individual achievements, by your great example of meeting the implacable demands of a rigorous cultivation of art, which you did by sweeping away thoughtless prejudices in a manner free of any cult of personality." It concluded with, "The thanks of a number of people who owe you a very great deal, people in whom these works, in the form that you have given to them through your magnificent interpretations, have remained indelibly alive, and who were privileged to receive decisive and lasting impressions as a permanent gift, and who know finally what you mean to us and what you will always mean to us." End quote. Among the near 70 signature signees were writers Hugo von Hofmannsthal, Stefan Zweig, architects and artists Josef Hoffmann and Gustav Klimt, physician Josef Breuer and Sigmund Freud, the famous anatomist Emily Zucker-Kandel, physicist Ernst Mach, singer-actress Lily Lehmann, and composer Arnold Schoenberg, to name but a few. Mahler's resignation from the court opera in the spring of 1907 was the beginning of his annus terribilis, as the Queen said once. 3 devastating events happened within close proximity of each other in the spring and summer of 1907. The aforementioned resignation, the loss of his eldest daughter from scarlet fever or diphtheria, and his diagnosis of a heart condition, a valve defect that rendered him vulnerable to heart infections. 4 years after his diagnosis, he did indeed succumb to a deadly blood infection, bacterial endocarditis, which led to his premature death in 1911 at age 51. The diagnosis stripped him of his ability to go for long walks in nature, which was a source of meditation and inspiration for Mahler. Between the death of their daughter and the diagnosis, Mahler had to rethink his entire existence. After enduring these 3 losses, Mahler wrote to his well-meaning but misguided friend who had advised him to read a popular self-help book about the psyche titled Dietetics of the Soul. He lashed out in response. "What is all this about the soul and its sickness, and where should I find a remedy? On a visit to Scandinavia? That would have been no more than a distraction. It was only here in solitude that I could come to my sense and regain a sense of awareness. Ever since I was overcome by panic and terror, as I was at that time, I have tried only to avert my eyes and stop listening. If I am to find the way back myself, or to myself, I must surrender to the horrors of loneliness. But basically, I'm speaking only in riddles because you do not know what went on inside me and what is still going on inside me. But it is certainly not a hypochondriac's fear of death, as you suppose. That I must die was something I already knew. But without trying to explain or describe something for which there are perhaps no words at all, I shall say only that in a single blow, I have lost all the clarity and calm that I had ever struggled to achieve, and that I stood vis-à-vis de rien, and that at the end of my life, I am like a beginner who has to learn how to walk and stand. Is this a mental outlook that must be fought with a psychiatrist's weapons, as you imply? And as for my work, there is something distinctly depressing about having to learn everything over again. I cannot work at my desk. Inner activity must be accompanied by outer activity. I admit that, superficial though it may seem, this is the greatest calamity that has ever befallen me. I have to start a new life, and here too, I am a complete beginner." So there was Mahler at the crossroads of his life. Alma Mahler wrote in her memoirs that Mahler set Das Lied von der Erde poems in Schlüterbach in 1907, where they fled after their daughter's death. However, according to Alfred Roller, the stage director, who often collaborated with Mahler, wrote that Mahler did not compose anything in Schlüterbach that summer. Roller's writings have credence since Bethge's translation volume of Chinese poems that the work is set to was not published until October of 1907, when Mahler would have long left Schlüterbach. Other correspondence and the manuscript dates also support Roller's statement. He composed most of it in the summer of 1908. Mahler chose 7 poems from the 1907 publication of Tang Dynasty 8th century poetry called The Chinese Flute. The Tang Dynasty was considered the golden age of poetry in China. This poetry volume offered a new translation, or more accurately, a reworked or freely adapted version of the poetry by Hans Bethge. Bethge was a writer with a doctorate in Romance literature. He based his adaptations on 3 already existing German and French translations. I will talk about the specific poets and poems as I talk about the songs, but in general, these poems talk about nature, its infinite beauty, its inspiration, and all it offers to man through joy and sadness, friendship and solitude, torture and solace, love and death. There are 6 songs in this song symphony, which are sung by tenor and mezzo, or baritone in lieu of the mezzo. The tenor begins with the first song, the mezzo sings the second song, and they proceed to alternate with each singing 3 songs. The tenor baritone version is rarely heard, but Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau certainly made the baritone version more popular after he recorded it with Leonard Bernstein conducting. The chamber version of this work, which this production uses, is scored for string and wind quintets, piano, harp, harmonium, mandolin, and percussion. Throughout the songs, Mahler uses the anhemitonic pentatonic scale, meaning a 5-note musical scale containing no semitones or half steps. For example, C, D, E, G, A would be a major pentatonic structure, or A, C, D, E, G would be a minor pentatonic structure. These scales are associated with the folk music or countries from the Far East. Mahler also incorporated the improvisational practice of heterophony, which is simultaneous single melodic lines played by different instruments, but with each having slightly different variations in their parts. This practice is also referred to as simultaneous variation, often found in non-Western folk and traditional ethnic music. The orchestration is spare. The songs that have sections with the full orchestra playing are the first, fourth, and sixth songs. I will talk about various orchestration moments when I speak about each song. The naming and numbering of the work is curious. By the time Mahler wrote Das Lied von der Erde, he had already written 8 symphonies. He was superstitious and was convinced that he would die if he named this work as his 9th symphony. After all, Beethoven, Bruckner, Schumann, and Dvorak all died shortly after they had written their 9th symphonies. Mahler attempted to fool the gods by calling this work by a name and not numbering. What to call it, though, was more complicated than just a poetry name or number. Was it a song cycle written for orchestra, like Bizet's Les Nuits d'été, or was it literally a song symphony? In the end, his subtitle was A Symphony for Tenor and Contralto or Baritone Voice and Orchestra. After Mahler was well into writing his 10th symphony, he felt it would be safe to add number 9 to the work. Apparently the gods were not fooled, and Mahler did indeed die shortly after he added number 9 to the work. He died in 1911 before he had a chance to premiere it and add edits. Bruno Walter paid tribute to Mahler in a 1911 memorial concert, which included the premiere of Das Lied von der Erde. He could not have chosen a more appropriate work by Mahler, since Mahler wrote to Bruno Walter these words while in the midst of composing it. I have been granted a time that was good, and I think it is the most personal thing I have done so far. The chamber version you will hear tonight is primarily by Schoenberg, who is a devoted friend and defender of Mahler's music. After Mahler received a bad review from the New York Times critic Olin Downs, Schoenberg wrote to Downs in earnest, pleading, "If you would study the orchestral score, you could not overlook the beauty of this writing. Such beauty is only given to men who deserve it because of all their other merits." Schoenberg spoke from experience, as he too had disdained Mahler's music in his younger years, but upon deeper study of his music, he grew to greatly respect Mahler. To Mahler, Schoenberg wrote of his 3rd Symphony premiere in 1904, quote, "In order to speak of the unheard of impression which your symphony made on me, I cannot talk as one musician to another, but I must speak as man to man. For I have seen your soul naked, stark naked. It lay before me like a wild, mysterious landscape with its horror-provoking shadows and ravines, and next to these joyful, charming, sunny meadows, idyllic resting places. I felt the symphony to be an experience of nature with its horror and evil and its transfiguring, tranquilizing rainbows. I felt they were battles about illusions. I felt the grief of a disillusioned man. I saw good and evil forces struggling with each other. I saw a man in torturing agitation, seeking for inner harmony. I could see it, a man, a drama, truth, most reckless truth. I had to let off steam. Please forgive me. I do not have medium feelings. It is either or." Schoenberg's words could well have been about Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde. They truly depict the essence of Mahler's music and what it embodies and attempts to express. It is after Schoenberg defended Mahler that Schoenberg and Zemlinsky, 2 young composers, became a part of Mahler's inner circle. He affectionately called them Eiseli and Beiseli, alluding to their mutual Jewish roots. Mahler's inner circle also included Alban Berg, Anton Webern, and Egon Velitz, among others, all of whom studied with Schoenberg. Mahler enjoyed seeing these young composers develop and reciprocally defended Schoenberg after the premiere of his 1st chamber symphony, Opus 9. Alma Mahler wrote that whole sections of the audience got up and noisily left the hall during the performance, prompting Mahler to rise and sternly shush the audience, which dutifully obeyed his reprimand. Mahler admitted to Alma that he did not always understand Schoenberg, but he supported their efforts just the same, saying, quote, "I don't understand his music, but he's young and perhaps he's right. I am old, and I dare say my ear is not sensitive enough." In 1919, at the age of 45, Schoenberg formed a society for private musical performances. The subscribers could hear new music and recent adaptations. He turned to Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde to arrange as a chamber version. Curiously, he did not complete it, so when he died in 1951, the arrangement remained unfinished. It was finally completed in 1980 by Rainer Rien, a German musicologist and composer of avant-garde music. Das Lied von der Erde lends itself to being arranged for chamber orchestra since the full symphonic version has countless moments of chamber-like orchestration. It is only in the first, fourth, and sixth movements where the orchestra has full tutti moments. Now let me talk about the songs. As I do this, keep in mind aspects of director Anne Bogart's brilliant dramatization and her concept of this work. She has added a third character, an actor, for whom she has written spoken lines in and around the songs. The tenor is the poet, loosely based on Mahler. The mezzo-soprano is the lover, loosely based on Alma Mahler, and the added spoken role is the mother who has endured a loss. We see the mother 6 times. There are 3 scenic pieces, a table associated with the poet, the window associated with the lover, and a bed which is associated with the mother. The characters do not directly relate to each other as none knows the other exists, but that does not mean they are never in each other's space. There are 2 operative words you should keep in mind while you watch this opera. Opposites, listen for opposites in text, texture, whatever, and ephemerality. The entire piece is about loss, but with the message that nature and its cycle of death and rebirth in spring is an ever-present reminder that loss of loved ones can bring rebirth in ourselves. Our own loss, meaning our death, can also find its rebirth in those of others. We can recover from loss through art, as Alma Mahler did with her composition after Gustav died, but we can also find hope and rebirth in other ways with those whom we have lost. Whatever the loss, nature can be a balm and source of rebirth for our souls. Despite the sense of hope through nature, Mahler feared the audiences would find the work too oppressive, and he asked Bruno Walter, "Won't people want to do away with themselves after hearing it?" Bruno Walter knew they would embrace it, and indeed, the end is full of hope, and people loved the work. The song number 1, Das Trinklied von Jammer der Erde, the drinking song of Earth's sorrow, is in A minor. The original poem, Song of Sorrow, is by the very famous Tang Dynasty poet Li Bai. He is also known as Li Po, Li Pai, Li Tepo, Li Taipai. I experienced this when I asked my Chinese students about Li Bai. They all said they knew him, but each of my 3 students referred to his name differently, and they all laughed about it. He lived an itinerant life during the Tang Dynasty, which was considered the golden age of Chinese poetry, as I mentioned. Every Chinese student studies the poetry of Li Bai, and songs set to Li Bai's poetry. He was famous for writing about nature and all the places he traveled through, friendships, both long and fleeting, solitude, and always the joy of drinking. He loved to drink. So this first song is sung by the tenor, the poet, in our production. It begins with the horn playing an interval of a fourth as if to say, "Listen up, the hunt is on." But what is the hunt for? Is it for happiness? Is it for solitude? Is it for escape? Or is it solace? Is it for answers? All of the above, I would say. From the first note we hear in the horn, we are thrown into a frenzied pseudo-waltz. The music initially sounds jubilant and joyous, but soon takes on a sort of mad, frenzied quality, almost lurching and yanking our senses hither and yon, as the poet sings leap after leap that then descend, then leap again over and over with verses 1 and 2, and the last verse beginning positive lines about golden goblets, a full wine cellar, and draining golden goblets, but each time ending the verse with Dunkel ist das Leben, ist der Tod. Darkness is life, is death. That line is comprised of 2 sets of 4 descending dotted half notes. Each time this line is sung, it is sung a half step higher, as if to drive the hard truth home. Let's have a listen to this opening section, which will end in the Dunkel line. Can you hear the horn? Da-da-da-dum. Sense of schwung, a swing in the music. The wine now beckons in the golden goblet. But don't drink yet. I'll sing you a song. Kummer, sorrow. Here he's talking about sorrow in the guise of laughter. And then it calms down. And sorrow draws nearer. The gardens of the soul lie wasted. Joys of the soul wither and die. The music is different. It's calmer. Here we go. He sets up the Dunkel. There we go. There was that descending passage of the Dunkel ist das Leben, ist der Tod. Death is life, is death, and that descending half note passage. The interlude between the second and third verses gradually becomes sparser in instrumentation, finally arriving at a moment where solo instruments tail in and out of each other in less extreme registers. So we've heard lots of leaps in the opening, but now suddenly it's almost like a camera focusing in, zooming in. There's a calm clarity about this music that puts us at ease and prepares us for the two lines about nature. The translation being, the firmament is forever blue and the earth will long stand firm and blossom in spring. We hear the opening themes, but they are now rhythmically slower in tempo, now giving the original theme fragments a pleasing calm that nature provides man. This calm is short-lived, though, as the music soon begins to wind back up when the next line refers to man, asking, "What long life have you? Not even 100 years can you delight in all the brash trumpery of this earth." The final verse brings us back to the yin and yang within the poem, a positive start to the verse that it is time to drink, but again ending with, "Drain your golden beakers to the last drop, dark is life, is death." With this first song, Mahler sets the listeners up to be emotionally yanked from pillar to post. Mahler's use of simultaneous variation is evident in this song. Again, this is where different instruments play a theme more or less at the same time, but in variation to each other. In this song, it is primarily the horn and the strings that play around each other, always leaping, then descending in the same way. So listen for that in this song. The second song, Der Einsame im Herz, the solitary one in autumn, is sung by the mezzo, who is the lover in this production. The original Chinese poet for this poem was Qian Qi, also from the Mid-Tang dynasty. He was considered one of the 10 talented poets of the Dali era. His poetry is imbued with nature references that reflect deeply emotional states and philosophical ideas. It opens with a single muted violin obbligato that is joined by a plaintive oboe melody. The obbligato rolls throughout much of the first half of the song and returns for the last verse that begins with Ich weine viel in meinen Einsamkeiten. I weep much in my loneliness. There is a decided chamber music feel to this song. It is somewhat barren and almost bleak, with the opening descending line reflecting the decline of all life as fall sets in for nature and for the poet, a loneliness that brings on an all-consuming weariness that will surely end in death. It is melancholic, yet beautiful and almost mesmerizing. A sort of peace falls over the listener as one is taken into solitude and sleep by the singer, in this case, the mezzo, who is the lover. I'll play the opening for you so you can hear Mahler's sparse chamber writing that sets the tone for this song. At the end of the song, which I will not play, you will hear an ephemeral moment of transcendence in Mahler's music under the text Sonne der Liebe, Son of Love, which ends in a question, will you never again shine and tenderly dry up my bitter tears? The music quickly unravels into a sort of dissonance and finally succumbs once more to the obligato and plaintive oboe, which carries the listener back to solitude. One could argue, however, that there's a flicker of hope put forth when the poet actually asks this question. So let's listen just to the opening. And it continues this way. You just feel the melancholy feeling of that constant rolling violin line, and certainly the coming of fall. In number 3, Von der Jugend, of Youth, the tenor sings this song. This is also by the Chinese poet Li Bai, or the poem is. Here we are taken out of the confines of solitude to a pavilion in the middle of a lake surrounded by bucolic nature, enjoyed by male friends, one of whom has stepped out of the moment to look on. In this case, our poet. It is carefree and once again full of joyous leaps in the melodic and instrumental lines. Mahler begins his song with a similar rolling obligato line to the second song, but this time it's in woodwinds and in a higher tessitura. There is a slower middle section set to the text. Auf des kleinen Teches stille Wasserfläche zeigt sich alles wunderlich im Spiegelbild. On the little pool's still surface, everything is strangely mirrored. Mahler clearly tries to incorporate musical mirroring in this song as a form of text painting. The pensive moment is fleeting and quickly returns to the bubbly, faster music full of joyful leaps and detached rhythmic chords. It bubbles along, reflecting the sort of joyful moment that can lead one to say, all is right with the world, knowing full well that it is fleeting and ephemeral. This song has an obvious use of the pentatonic scale, which gives the song a more Far Eastern feel. Let's have a listen to this very opening, and let's hear that rolling line, this time higher and in the winds. There's that rolling figure, but higher and in the woodwinds. And we're going to hear, in the middle of the little pool stands a pavilion of green and a white porcelain pavilion. The tiger's back. The jade bridge arches over to the pavilion. You just hear the joy in this music. One cannot help but smile when hearing it. The fourth song, Von der Schönheit of beauty is sung by the mezzo. It is yet another song set to the poetry of Li Bai. This time, it is centered around a joyful moment of female friends picking flowers along a river. But unlike the men in the third song, the women are interrupted by a group of men riding by on horses. It is clearly a song that takes one back to the exuberance of youth. This song also uses mirror effects in the music, as the poetry describes the women on its banks and their arms reflecting in the water. One can clearly hear the pentatonic scale incorporated in this song as well. When the text describes the fabric being lifted from the girl's arm, it is slow and sensual, a fleeting moment to take your breath away. I just want to point out that similarly in song number 3, the men's sleeves are described as being pushed up and the nape of their necks being exposed. Both lines, I feel, are decidedly sensual and again, ephemeral moments. The intimate moment is soon disrupted by the arrival of the men riding by. The horn reappears, again reflecting the hunt. It is surrounded by suddenly stentorian driving rhythms depicting the horses and the pumped up men. Let's have a listen. Sunlight mirrors the slender limbs and their sweet eyes. And the breeze lifts with its caresses the fabric of their sleeves. So this is still the women together. Now suddenly the music's going to change. Ha! Men are riding by. Great sense of their pride as they are riding by. The song ultimately reverts back to slower, more reflective writing as the most beautiful of the girls catches the eye of the most handsome of the men. The poem ends with schwingt klagend noch die Ergung ihres Herzen noch. Her agitated heart still throbs and grieves for him. The vocal line goes to a low A on the word ardent gaze. She is clearly swept away by the experience and moved to her core. The music that follows in the postlude is tender and beautiful as she continues to live in her ephemeral memory moment of bliss. Just before the postlude ends, the horn returns, clearly showing her thoughts remain on the handsome young rider as vivid as the day he rode by when their eyes met. Number 5, which I won't play for you, is Drunken Spring. And it is also set to a Li Bai poem. The drunkard boldly holds onto a facade of insouciance as he asks, if life is but a dream, why should there be toil and torment? He defiantly states that he will drink until he can drink no longer. Mahler has him reeling and singing high note after high note again, like the unrelenting first song, as if to say, he will do as he pleases. When he meets up with a bird announcing spring's arrival, the music slows down and we find the singer and the bird in a one-on-one moment. The bird perhaps represents truth and hope, but the drunkard wants nothing to do with spring. He has given up and wants only to sleep and drink. We finally get to song number 6, Der Abschied, the farewell, which is sung by the mezzo. It is set to text by two poets, Mong Kao Yen and Wang Wei, with added text by Mahler at the end. It is 30 minutes long and is sung by the lover in this incredible movement. The entire song has very free cadenza-like passages, so much so that he said to Bruno Walter that he was at a loss as how to conduct it. Scholars all agree that this song is what places the work in the symphony category, as it is a poetic tour de force. It has 3 decided sections. In the first section, the singer finds herself in nature as night approaches. It begins with an ominous and foreboding low C octave played by the piano, bass, and cello. It has 3 decided sections. In the first section, the singer finds herself in nature as night approaches. It begins with an ominous and foreboding low C octave played by the piano, bass, and cello. If you recall, the 4th song started with low bass notes, but in this song, they take on a completely different feel and meaning, despite the similar accented punctuation. The low Cs are then joined by a haunting, almost keening oboe melody and single horn punctuations. To me, the horns now no longer represent a hunt for meaning for life. All is over. The ominous opening bars eventually give in to a softening and return to a world of nature. The second section, she sits waiting for her friend in order to say a final farewell. Here the singer begins the second section with an interval leap reminiscent of the opening of the first drunken song, but in augmentation. In the third and final section, the 2 friends proceed to talk. We begin to hear a dogged, trudging rhythm which steadily moves forward. I should note that the third section is preceded by a long and deeply moving orchestral interlude. Mahler goes all out with word painting throughout this song. At the very end, there is an utterly sublime moment at the beginning of Mahler's added text, which translated as, "Everywhere the dear earth blossoms in spring and grows green again. Everywhere and forever the distances shine bright and blue, forever and ever." And that word is ewig, ewig. Ewig is repeated over and over, slowly, gently persistent, reassuring us that there is hope after loss, as the orchestra fades to nothing. These final bars are Mahler at his most sublime in his musical depiction of the cycle of loneliness and loss, pain and hope, death and recovery. Here's the opening of the song. Almost like the beginning of a death march. Start to hear this bottom, this sighing figure throughout. But then the music starts to open up and take us back to nature, where she is standing, waiting. So although it starts very ominously, again, nature comes back, and this song has an incredible journey. I won't play you the very special end because you need to hear it yourself when it happens in time. In closing, Mahler thought outside of artistic traditions of the time. This very trait of Mahler is what makes the Boston Lyric Opera staging of his song symphonies seem so apt and, quite frankly, appropriate. Opera is at a crossroads. Creators are delving deep into new ways to approach an old art form, and BLO is on the cutting edge of this movement. Just as Mahler added his words to the poems he set, director Anne Bogart, in her brilliance, is now inspired and compelled to add her words to Mahler's work. Art building upon art, directors and producers taking chances and imagining ways outside of the box and beyond standard practiced expectations. I choose to believe that Mahler, who did just that, would have stood behind the creative process and imaginings of this very special staging of Das Lied von der Erde. Thank you.